Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us again. The last Tuesday of the month, as usual, for our monthly deep dive here. And we're going to do it a little bit different this time. Instead of doing a presentation on various different things like we've done in the past, we're just going to have a little fireside chat with our AvTek's, our Chief Security Officer, David Cox, which is joined here with us. Hey, David.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
It looks like you're fuzzing out a little bit there, man. What's going on? Your lovely internet going
Uh,
bad or something? What you
yeah,
got?
we got storms in the area
Oh,
today,
you got
so
storms
it
there.
may
Okay.
get a
Well,
little
we'll hang
rocky
in there.
here.
If we
Yeah,
lose you, I'll wait for you and come back. Okay.
yeah. All right.
Well, we're just going to have a quick conversation because we've been doing a lot of things with customers out there around compliance. And I was doing a presentation this past week at a conference, a banking conference up in Omaha, Nebraska. And I was presenting about our compliance as a service program, which we've got insurance companies, banking companies, benefits companies, you name it. We have them that are using our program to help them stay within compliance readiness at any given time. But during the actual presentation, I got asked a question by an IT manager at a bank about risk assessments, and that okay, we have a compliance department, but I, I'm running my IT department and I want to do risk assessment there. Do I have to do the compliance program to do the risk assessment? And that got me to thinking that it goes back to something that I presented a couple of years ago about cybersecurity and compliance. And there's this blurring line between them, and sometimes people join the two together. So we're just going to talk through in a perspective, and before we dive into it, so you can understand from David's point of view. David, once you explain to everybody your history and your background in compliance and risks and all of that, and so they can have a feel for where your knowledge comes from.
Yeah, for about the last 10 or 12 years, I've been heavily involved in cybersecurity compliance, starting working with special counsel offices for the Ohio Attorney General's office, making sure they were compliant with the IRS 1075 regulations. Underwent audits every 18 months with those clients. So the Ohio Attorney General's office would come in, assess the cybersecurity posture of all the clients, and go through the entire audit process every 18 months with those clients. It taught me a lot about what to expect, not only in compliance and frameworks, but the audit itself, preparing for it, participating in it, responding to activities after the audits. It's a continual process. Compliance is a continual process, and it taught me a lot about how everything ties together. There's no way to do it all at one time and say, "Hey, I'm good," wrap a bow on it, move on. It just doesn't work that way.
Even if we wished it that way.
Right. We all wish it would. Yeah, we all wish it would.
Okay. So what I want to do is quickly just and there's only the one slide of the day. This is only going to be the one slide, but I think it's important because this is where I was talking about where we differentiate. So when it comes to when I tell a lot of people this is I can have cybersecurity without compliance, but I can't have compliance without cybersecurity. That's the very easy relationship to understand the two because I call cybersecurity a tactical approach of what we're doing. This is how we're installing tools. This what tools are we installing? How are we configuring them? How are we monitoring them? How do we remediate based on what it feeds back to us? That is what cybersecurity is. And it includes what's our standard operating procedures of how we install things and how we address when something needs to be remediated, our communication paths, stuff like that. But then compliance is all about aligning that information with a set of standards and document it, proving, having the evidence to prove I meet these standards. So what these standards come from, right? Those standards are dictated by industry, local, state, federal, you know, even B2B, customer to vendor. It can be dictated where a customer can have some very specific rules about their engagement and how they're going to handle their information. So as we dive into this, we want to talk about risk assessment, the process of doing risk assessment, because that's one of the areas where it feeds both sides. And that's where that question comes from. Can we do the risk assessment for them, for the IT team, to help them understand where they're set and not have to do all the compliance standards and map the compliance standards and all that type of thing. And absolutely, we can do that, right, David? I mean, from a standpoint
Yeah.
of walk us through a difference of the approach of, you know, risk assessment, if you're looking at it from an IT perspective and just doing from the cybersecurity and the state of they're in, versus how risk assessment bleeds in and feeds to the compliance side.
Yeah. So I had someone ask me once, what do you do for a living? So I said, well, I work in cybersecurity and compliance. What does that mean? I had to really think about it. And what it boils down to is every framework helps you identify risks within or potential risks within your industry, within your organization. And the framework helps guide you through a remediation process. Anybody that's plugged into the internet has risk. It doesn't matter how much cybersecurity you have in place, you have risk. You have to identify the risk. You have to minimize the risk as best you can. And then you have to plan for what happens when that risk is exposed, when the worst day becomes reality. And that's really what compliance is all about. When you start talking to people that don't understand cybersecurity and compliance and talking words like that, it tends to make a lot more sense to them than, well, I have to be compliant with the NIST CSF 2.0 framework. Well, what is that? Well, it's a long list of stuff you got to do. There's no way to make it simple, but really to make compliance simple, it's identifying risk within your environment, doing the risk assessments, doing the risk analysis. You know, where are your risks? What are your risks? What is the potential loss of revenue from those risks? And how are you going to mitigate those risks to reduce the vulnerability as much as you possibly can?
So take us through what what makes up a risk assessment.
Understanding your environment is critical. Whether you know everything or whether you have someone like AvTek come in and evaluate every nook and cranny within your IT environment, I can almost assure you anybody that's been doing anything with computers for 10 years, they're not aware of 25% of what they have. It's always been there. It's always worked. Nobody pays any attention to it. So you need that set of outside eyes to take a look at your environment, evaluate what's going on, and bring things to your attention that you may not be aware of. You need to do that on a regular basis. Most compliance frameworks call that out to do it at least annually, most quarterly, as often as you can do it. It is productive. Identifying security patches. Security patches are, you get Windows patches every week, right?
Patch
If you don't
Tuesday.
patch for 6 months and you haven't run a vulnerability scan or a risk assessment in 6 months, you could have a computer that's a year behind. That's a very big risk potentially. So staying on top of it is very, very important.
And for you out there, this is our work cohort, George.
Yeah.
George, for
George,
some reason,
George loves
whenever he hears
webinars.
my voice, he wants to get up on your desk. I don't know what it is, but he
Never
loves speaking
fails.
up.
He's a cybersecurity expert by
Yeah,
now.
hey man, that's what the engineer is, right?
He's committed.
So, from one of the things that we've been doing in approaching this, we have a client that just, for example, when you talk about these things, lots of people talk about it as, man, it's all this complex stuff, right? And what we're finding out is just like we got this from a customer, was it yesterday? I think it was. Yeah, yesterday from the state of Arkansas. Their cybersecurity board is now putting out a letter to all these businesses. It's not just education, but it's everywhere about the minimum standards they need to meet. Well, that's compliance.
Yeah.
But what they're telling them is these are the tactical things you must have in place. That's the cybersecurity side. And it's funny when I go look at cybersecurity insurance, because everybody that's heard me talk about, I use cybersecurity insurance as a baseline for everybody across the board. It doesn't matter what industry, what state, I don't care. at a minimum subset, the very industry that is there to help if you are in trouble, what they require shows up in every compliance standard out there. And typically what we're seeing, they even have more than what we saw that Arkansas board, cybersecurity board just put out. We were actually kind of shocked because it was kind of very basic
Yeah.
in what they put out.
Yeah.
The standard stuff, MFA, patching, um, OS upgrade, um, um, network monitoring, and there was, I think, one more. I think they had in there a fifth one. I can't remember what it was. Backups, I think, is what it had, or something like that. But all those things have been in the cybersecurity framework, insurance framework from the
In every
beginning.
framework. Yeah. In every
And
framework.
exactly,
When I
because
started in IT, it was called Microsoft Best Practices. You set everything up according to Microsoft Best Practices. And honestly, that carries through to today. Best practices were cybersecurity standards for the most part. You did it this way for performance, but also for security, for the ability to monitor your systems, control your systems. And that's really what a lot of people are starting to learn today is they didn't think they needed to be compliant with anything, but all of a sudden the Arkansas board of whatever is making you do this. Texas board of whatever is making you do that. If you're in business, you are required to do certain things from a cybersecurity posture because it's assumed that if there's a breach, you're at least doing this much.
the minimum subset.
Yep. And that's going to protect people from bigger fines. It's going to protect people from potentially lawsuits. Um, like I said earlier, everybody's at risk. If you're plugged into the internet, you're at risk. There is always a chance that you're going to get breached. You're going to have an incident that you're going to have to deal with. If you're doing all this common stuff correctly to the best of your ability, it's really hard for anybody to hold you accountable or liable if something does happen.
That's an interesting statement because there's a term that's used because it's never stated that if you put these places in there, you're protected.
Yep.
It's not 100% thing because, it's the white hats, black hats. It's evolving with technology and everything evolving. I'm not going to use the two-letter word because it gets too much traffic but
Yep.
it's all been this way forever. From the very beginning,
Mhm.
I can remember it's always this evolution of technology, evolution of people trying to get in, take your stuff versus us trying to keep them out, not take our stuff.
Yep.
But in this, in talking with legal counsels and talking with breach coaches, which happens to be legal counsels for the insurance companies, and talking with all these folks, the key term they say is best efforts, documented, keyword, documented best efforts. Best efforts also means not one time. You're ongoing
Right.
and applying this, and you're making best effort to stay up to date and protect your environment best you can based on the standards, but also based on industry and everything else. With that, if something happens, insurance is going to pay out. Legal is
Yep.
going to be there. FBI is going to help you. All these things happen. This is the area that there's a lot of people who go, "Oh, I got antivirus, I'm covered," and I still hear that today.
Yep.
It bewilders me, but I still hear that. I got antivirus, I'm covered.
Or I have a firewall. Nothing can get to me.
Right. And then we run a penetration test and go, not,
Remember all those holes you opened up for your cameras and your phones and your this and your that and everything else?
there's all these
Exactly.
problems, right?
Yep.
So doing a cyber risk, let's, one of the things that, as you see, and actually you see where Google has changed now, like with DMARC and SPF now, so your Gmail, all of a sudden, your Gmail's not going through. Reason why is because standards are being applied now, even at your web page, your email, all that, to make sure you're setting the protections. Because email, simple email, 90% of all hacks start with business email compromise.
Hmm.
Still today, per the FBI uh, input. You can go look it up on their website. That's the part where when you talk to these folks and try to get them to understand about the risk, the most simple thing that you got to have, because I don't know a business that doesn't run off email, We all communicate with it. Our vendors communicate with it. Our customers communicate with it. And we know for a fact it's used against us. We don't train ourselves how to protect ourselves. We don't put the right pieces of place, the simple tools that we need to have in place to monitor, protect ourselves. Nobody wants my information, right?
Yep.
Risk assessments go address all of these things and get you to put it in a manner from an IT perspective. I can sit down with the owner of the company, the CEO, the CFOs, the people that actually have fiduciary responsibility. If something happens, it's their, you know what, on the line.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Our business may be down and my employee's not getting a paycheck, but I'm fiduciary legally liable as the CEO of the company. And as the owner, yeah, the buck stops with you, as like they'll say, but I don't think people realize just how much of an impact that is. And by having a risk assessment done and understand where you're at, so then you can move forward and make those steps. You don't have to do all of it at one time. That's the other thing people like to think about is I got to do all this. I got to spend all this to go do it all right now. Yes, you could do that. Do I think that's the right way to do it? No. Because every environment, I can have two CPAs and both their environments are different. They're both CPA firms, but how they do business is different. Who they do business with is different. So what do we need to put in place? For one, most things are going to be alike, but there's going to be other things I put in one environment that I don't need in another environment because they don't have those things in place. So the risk assessment's what brings that out. Was that a fair way to look at it?
Very fair way to look at it. I think another thing that's worth discussing is a risk assessment is only as good as the information that's presented to you. And I'm not talking about a report. I'm talking about someone that knows what they're looking at, knows how to interpret the data, and equate that to a business conversation as opposed to you have all these things that need to be fixed. What do you want to fix first? That's not your expertise. That's our expertise. We should be the ones guiding you through the process. We should be the ones presenting you with a plan saying, these are the vulnerabilities. This is the one that puts you at most risk. Let's try to get this one done first. But there are three more that cost almost no money. It's going to be a little bit of a change in the environment or the way your employees do things, but there's very little cost. So let's throw them in there too. And all of a sudden we're reducing our risk score, our risk score just by doing a few simple things right out of the gate. Auditors love it when you have a list of things that you know you're weak on and a plan of how you're going to remediate those. We know this is going to cost $1,000. We can't do that until October. So we're going to put that in our October budget. And if all of our vulnerabilities, if all of our risks are on a spreadsheet with a date attached to when we're going to remediate it, an estimated cost, an estimated impact to the operating system or the mechanics within the company, auditors love that because then they know that you're mitigating your risk.
It's not just the auditors, but anyone. I mean, if you're doing
Yeah.
that risk assessment and you're doing those things, the insurance companies,
Bankers, venture
exactly,
capital, private equity.
you're
Yeah.
going exactly where I was going. Because we talk about the insurance companies, we talk about the auditors,
Yep.
but I've got clients. You and I talk to them right now today, right? We've
Yep.
got one we're working with that their client is asking them for their risk posture report.
Mm-hmm.
Because now you have to think about this, and this is the other thing to think about is, yeah, we're talking about your environment right now, but one of your biggest exposures today is your vendor to vendor and client to client relationship and client vendor relationship, because there's interchange of information there.
Yep.
If who you're communicating with and transferring information between has a poor security risk posture,
Yep.
it puts you at risk. So how do we do best efforts to support that? Well, part of the risk assessment identifies you looking at your environment, but then we want to identify that relationship okay, you got this network, you're using the SaaS-based application. What are they doing to protect themselves, to protect your information? Your email's hosted somewhere. What's doing there to actually protect that information? You're trading files with your clients. Are you doing that securely? Or are you just throwing that out on the open internet via email that's
Yep.
got PII information in it? As soon as you transfer that, you've just become liable from FTC rules. Something simple as sending an email puts you in that scenario. If you don't know that risk, you've just set yourself up for liability.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's gotten larger. And supply chain, the term supply chain, and that's what we're talking about, vendor to vendor, vendor to client, client to vendor, that whole supply chain network is one of the biggest targets right now too, outside of the email compromise environment. So
Absolutely.
using this risk assessment is extremely important just to make sure your best efforts of cybersecurity is in place. As you remember before, we said I can have cybersecurity without compliance, but I can't have compliance without cybersecurity. So that risk assessment sets us up. So now, anytime you get asked, and you're going to, right? I mean, we got
Sooner or later.
a school that just got a letter from the Arkansas Cybersecurity Board saying
Yep.
you got to have these things in place now,
Yep.
out of the blue, right? By doing these things, it sets you up to meet those things. And especially your background, we still today are hearing when we talk to various clients in various industries that, and especially in the financial industry that we target a lot, we got a lot of clients there. We still have folks, even in that industry, that highly regulated industry, saying we don't have no compliance requirements.
Right. Right. Right.
So one of the things I was thinking about, and you and I discussed this other day, outside of me talking about cybersecurity insurance, there's another compliance requirement out there that everybody, any company, doesn't matter who you are, even mom and pop, someone that mows lawns, a landscaping company, they have compliance requirements.
Yeah. From somebody somewhere.
It's been around a long, long, long time. Just
Yep.
nobody enforced it until now.
True.
We all have PII information,
Mm-hmm.
and that applies HIPAA.
Mm-hmm.
It's been there for everybody. You got an employee. Do you have their driver's license number? You're under compliance. It's something as simple as that. So how, from
You
a
have to.
risk standpoint, when we do these assessments, how do we help our clients? I know how we do it, but I want you to answer the question.
Sure.
You're not. Because see, folks, you got to understand something. He'll let me talk and just sit there and nod his head if I don't make him talk. So, got to do it. From a perspective of doing the risk assessment from the cybersecurity standpoint, how does that allow us to guide them to what compliance standards they really should pay attention to for their environment?
Yeah.
How does that process, how's our process help them do that?
It helps us identify what type of information they may have. So it's going to call out whether or not they have credit card data on their environments. It's going to call out if they have personal identifiable information, personal healthcare information. Um, there's a question and answer piece to it that there are some things that we can't discover without just asking the right questions. Do you manage your own payroll? Well, if you don't, then you need to assess your vendor that processes your employees' information, because at the end of the day, you're supplying the information about your employees to a third party. You have to make sure that third party is protecting your employees' data the same way you're required to protect that data. Where else? I lost my train of thought there.
You're on the right train, because one of the things I was thinking about, and it's important for people to understand, is when you bring in those third parties, like someone's doing the processing, right?
Right,
Coming in
right,
there, you
right.
find that information about the risk assessment and do that. I think that's an area that a lot of people, when we talk about validate, your vendors and getting their security posture information. So
Yep,
what are we talking about there? We have to do it all the time because the platforms
yep,
we use and stuff like that, and the technology we use, we have to do it. And it's what we call our due diligence.
right.
So from our security posture due diligence, we go in. So every vendor we use, we have them supply us their SOC report.
Yep,
Are they got their SOX compliancy? What are their security posture reports? Anything that we can get. What is their disaster recovery requirements and stuff of that nature? That's information you ask for that you have as part of your package, your risk assessment, because
yep,
now you can show I went to the vendor, this is what they provided. I did my best efforts to make sure my risk is addressed by doing that.
yeah,
If I'm working with someone that can't supply that, that's when I need to dig deeper. And that's of
yep,
course when
yep.
somebody like us that understand how to go dig into that can get that and validate, is this an issue or not?
The other thing I was going to talk about is just having the client think about where their data is. Where is your valuable data stored?
Data
Who has
governance.
access to your valuable data? How is it protected from the outside world? How does it move around? How is it backed up? How often do you check your backups? How often do you actually log in to a backup to make sure that people can log in to a server that has to be restored from a backup? If you don't do that at least once a year, your backups may be no good and you don't even know about it. Little things like that. I get an email every day saying the backup succeeded. Unless you're verifying that, you don't know that. You really don't. There are too many stories out there about we had backups successful for a year. Something happened. We had to restore from a backup and it wasn't available. It happens all the time, unfortunately. Um, but a lot of clients that we deal with don't really know where their data is. They don't know who has access to their data. Uh, you may have company data, confidential company budgeting data in a folder that the guys in the warehouse can get to because no one knew how to protect it. No one knew where to put the files. No one knew where to put the folders. Those are important things to identify as a company because the potential damage to the company is pretty heavy on
Well,
things like that. And
that brings an important part because we talk about risk, we talk about the hackers and all that, and that's always a big focus. But what you just brought up is a huge risk that auditors look at. It
yeah,
has nothing to do with the external hacker,
right.
right? It is who has access to information that shouldn't have it, that could easily take it and walk out the door with it.
Yep. Yep.
And that happens a lot more than you think. And
It
that's
does.
big risk areas there that has to be identified. That's another area of risk assessment that's going to identify these things. So your operational state and your information, what you call, I call it data governance. It's how do we
Hmm.
govern our data to make sure the right person, the right place, the right time has what they need to it and don't have access to what
Yeah.
they don't need to. That's the important part. The other
You
area,
used the word due diligence a bit ago, and the due diligence is
yep,
something that I love that because if you equating that to even a teenager, if you drive a car, you know your brakes are good, you know it has gas, you know the tires are good, you know the windshield's not cracked. You've done the general inspections of your vehicle before you get out on the road. You know the oil's changed. If you don't know these things, you're going to learn these things pretty quickly, right? Same with your IT environment. You don't know everything there is to know about your environment, but there are people you have available to you that do. So if you don't know everything about cars, you take your car to the mechanic. You have an inspection done. You make sure that everything's working so that you don't end up in a situation where you're sued because your brakes went out because you weren't paying attention and the lines rotted out.
yep. Same way by
It's
going at the annual, just had an annual physical, right?
yep,
Hey, I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
good. Everything seems to be working right. But you really don't know until you go someone understands how to look at the engine of your body to tell you what's right and what's wrong, right?
exactly.
It's
An
just
expert, a
the same way.
professional.
Exactly. It's no different in coming into it. So this has been fun. I'm going to actually have David, he doesn't realize, but we're going to do this a lot more often on other topics as well. Um,
Yay.
well,
No, I do enjoy talking about it. I'm just not one for the limelight.
and this is really not about us. This is about our clients. This is about
Hmm.
people that we want to make sure is protected and they be able to do the things so they can do what they love to do, what makes them successful. That's what we pride ourselves on. It's, you know, if we can make sure our clients are successful by educating and making sure we can deliver what they need and they can focus on their business,
Exactly.
most
That's the
important,
key.
right? And that's the fun part for me is making
Yeah.
sure that happens.
Yeah.
So,
Let them do what they do well. Let us do what we do well, and everything runs like a perfectly tuned machine.
all right. I was like, matter of fact, I'm sitting here, I'm seeing people on here going, more David
Oh no.
in the chat here. Uh, and Kyle, you said my volume is, oh, wow. I've never been told that I was hard to be heard. That's a new one on me. But hopefully we got that. I think there was a little bit of internet issue at the beginning, but I think we should be good now. With that said, we're going to wrap up here. If anybody's got questions about risk assessments, compliance as a service, how we can help you, just reach out to us. I know that on our site, you can go and book a call with us, and we'll be happy to get on, myself or David or both, and have a conversation with you. So until next Tuesday of last Tuesday of October, I hope y'all have a blessed month. I hope everything's successful for you and your health stays good. And we look forward to seeing you next time. We'll talk to you soon.